Andrew, you've been referenced for the jurisprudence, false news, sedition, and that's a story that most people know. What is the most impactful story you did when you were at the Monitor?
I really do not know. I did so many stories at Monitor. I can't remember which one must have been the most impactful. But I know one that created a lot of buzz at that time was when I reported the disappearance of Colonel Jet Mwenda, because the Minister of State for Defense came and said that was not true, and the next day it turned out that was true. I think on the third or fourth day of reporting, I did report that the pilot and 2 others were dead, 3 other people had been rescued, and Jet Mwenda and others were still missing. But that night, I think the Minister of Defense, the State Minister for Defense, he was Deputy Chief Justice Stephen Kavuma, called a press conference, addressed live television, and said everybody had been rescued. So the next morning I got to office, the headline in New Vision, everybody has been rescued. In the Monitor, pilot and 2 others dead, 3 rescued, Jet Mwenda and 3 others still missing. So we had made a mistake, which happened to be good at the Monitor. We had not watched the 9 o'clock news on UBC, at that time UTV. So I reached Wafula's office. I had been the star reporting this story and proving I was always right, the minister was wrong. Wafula picks his phone, he looks at me crestfallen, he picks the phone, calls the family of the pilot and apologizes for us announcing that he's dead. I want to cut a long story short, but at 2 p.m. it turns out Monitor was right, Minister was wrong, and we celebrated. We celebrated that we were right, not that people had died. So I think that was the most intense story I ever did, because it lasted about a week of searching for the pilot and the people on the plane.
Of course, you had many stories that brought the Monitor into trouble, and yourself into trouble. If you look back now, what do you think has been Monitor's most meaningful impact on the road to democratizing Uganda?
I think what attracted me to Monitor at that time was a kind of subtle independence that is absent, especially in a certain section of the opposition today. When I joined the Monitor, the editor-in-chief, my father there, Wafula Ogutu, you know I'm the grandfather of everybody except Wafula. Wafula Ogutu, Charles Onyango, Bo, or Kevin Aliro, they were actually close friends with the most influential people in the government. The president would call Wafula Ogutu almost every week. People like Augustine Ruzindana, Eria Katega, he was the second most powerful man in the government. Amama Mbabazi, Kahindo Tafire, Jim Wezi, all these pillars of the government at that time, they were friends or good acquaintances with the editors at Monitor. So there was a dense interaction between the players in the state and the editors at Monitor. And I also inherited that tradition. Throughout my life at Monitor, I was close to President Museveni. I would go to his house and have his breakfast or lunch. If I wrote something he did not agree with, he would call me on phone and complain, and I would share it with Wafula or with Charles Obo, Nobo Mayombo, General Selim Saleh, Eria Kategaya. I would be at their home. They were the government officials, were the important sources of information. When I did my radio show, Andrew Mwenda Live, the most important guests on my show were always government officials. Of course, on air, we would enter active combat, but when we left air, we left the radio, we went to my office, we drank tea, we talked as friends. So I was cultivated at Monitor in an environment whereby, yes, we held officials to account, but they were allies in form of being sources of information, and we would debate with them openly and freely. What estranges me from the Uganda of today is that people who disagree politically are enemies. It isn't that we disagree, but we can talk. It is that we disagree, we are there to destroy you. That is the attitude I see today. So I feel alienated both from political activism and journalism, because previously these were opponents to fight and defeat. Now they are enemies to fight and destroy. And that kind of politics, I think, is not conducive to the cultivation of democratic ideals. So Monitor at that time was really a democratic platform because it facilitated the interaction between us in the media and officials in the government and in the opposition, and we looked at each other as colleagues who disagree on how to achieve goals that we both shared. Yeah.
Some people listening to you today would, and I'm not talking about the beard and the gray, would fail or struggle to reconcile the you of today and the you who, when you resigned from the Monitor, said a thriving and independent media house has been turned into a supplicant of a corrupt, tribal, and nepotistic dictatorship. Do you still hold those views about the government?
Well, my views about the government are complicated, whatever. You see, you are doing the typical gotcha journalism. Because if you read my views, I wrote prison notes. I encourage you to go and read them. I wrote notes when I was in jail. Museveni had sent me to jail. I say Uganda is the most free society I know, even freer than the United Kingdom where I studied. No pun intended for Kate. Oh, she has disappeared. Or more free than the United States. It's there on my online. In one sentence, I can say something, either because I am angry or because I have not provided context, but I have always lived and believed that Uganda under Museveni and the NRM has been fairly democratic, as I have told you. I could attack Museveni on radio and he throws me in jail. I get out of jail, I go have breakfast with him. So my relationship with him and his government officials has always been complicated. After Museveni threw me in jail, I even invited him to my radio show on KFM. He came, appeared on my radio show, and drove me with me in his car back to State House after the show. I escorted him in his car to State House. So the relationship has been that complex. It is not something you can reduce to a single line I wrote
do you feel misunderstood? Do you feel that you're treated or judged unfairly?
I don't pay attention to such things. I'm not that self-indulgent. My ego is very big, but not in that area. I understand, by the way, having been in journalism, people will have different perspectives about me. And you see, I'm a journalist who seeks clarity, not reputation. People who seek reputation, therefore you begin to dance to the tune of everybody else there. I give very little concern to what other people think about me. I give a lot of concern about what are my core beliefs and do I uphold them every day. That's what I do.
Which is very surprising, seeing that you're the only person I know who's put his feet up on Wafula's desk and gotten away with it. But you spend, I don't know what you do these days apart from the Independent, but you spend a lot of time, or you appear to spend a lot of time, kind of advising or propagating the status quo. You said in 2017 that Uganda was like Rome under Augustus Caesar, hostile to, but in need of a monarchy. Does Uganda need a monarchy?
Well, I personally think that Ugandans have gradually accepted the evolution of a monarchy with like the Romans, with the humility of experience, yes.
And you also said in your famous, I know you had the famous article you wrote when you went to Stanford, but you also wrote in your resignation some highfalutin words about liberty, and saying you fight for liberty. But you seem very pricky when you're criticized by people who are on the other side. Do you feel that we have an environment within which those who support the government, those who are critical of the government, can speak, can have a conversation across the aisle? Because that's one of the things that the Monitor was set up to foster. Do you feel that we have expanded the space, or has the space actually shrunk?
Actually, I believe that Uganda, we have the Monitor, first of all, the Uganda Confidential Teddy Chair, then the Monitor, then the Independent, the Observer. We have expanded the frontiers of freedom. I left Monitor because Museveni was saying we cannot write about his family. I went to Independent and we wrote about it. And then he came to my home, met my mom, and we talked. I flew with him on his chopper, and we agreed that Uganda is large enough for the two of us.
Was that your road to Damascus moment?
I have
from Paul to Saul, Saul to Paul?
I don't know whether I've been on a road to Damascus. What I can say is I have been like this all my life. I should tell you that I think I could be the only human being who would go to Lusaka, sleep in Obote's house, go to Rwachitura, sleep in Museveni's house, go to Kigali, sleep in Kagame's house, go to Mbara, sleep in Besige's house. In fact, sleep in his bedroom when him and Winnie were not there. And the four of them were fighting each other. So there must be something in my personality that allows me to relate to people that I criticize, who are conflicting and still relate to me, which is, I think, a special attribute. Now, where is the road to Damascus? I have always been friends with all these players. It is not, my relationship with Museveni, you worked with me at the Monitor, is not new. I mean, Mhoz, for example, I went with him on his honeymoon. Who goes with a friend on a honeymoon? So people, they say you have changed, you're a friend of Mhoz, but I've always been his friend.
What did you do? I mean, now that you mention it, a honeymoon with, what was your role?
Cheerleader.
Okay, one last question before I let you go. One of the things, and I don't think you get enough credit for, and I never believed I could publicly give you some credit, is to bring evidence-based argument to public discourse. But you've always said, analyze, don't moralize. Do you have space in your heart, in your soul, for moral values and judgment, and do those things matter in a country like Uganda?
Let me put it this way. I'm a very passionate person when it comes to morals and ethics. But I'm also realistic enough to recognize that when push comes to shove, whether they are governments or states, the demands of real politics will override the demands of ethics. So even in politics, if the state security if there is a conflict between security and order stroke security is in conflict with the liberal ideals of freedom and democracy and human rights, I can promise you security and order will always win. Even in international relations, my friends, the ambassadors have been running away from Western embassies. I have a disagreement with them over this war in Ukraine. When it comes to real politics, I don't think Western countries would really dig in and fight for democracy, as they say. Because right now they are running out of fuel. They have to go to Saudi Arabia. It's not a democracy. It's not different from Putin's Russia. They're not going to starve simply because they can't get fuel. So they will have to go to bed with Iran, with Venezuela, and with Saudi Arabia for oil. But you are saying the other side you are fighting authoritarian government that violates human rights, which is called Russia. But you're entering bed with Iran, Venezuela, and Saudi Arabia. So I am an idealist who is realistic enough to recognize that when necessity demands, ethics and morals sometimes are adjusted in order to meet the needs of the moment. But I have to go. I have run out of time. I have an appointment.
Do you sleep well at night?
Comfortably. I think I sleep more comfortably than anybody else I know in the world.
Andrew, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.